Hello, my name is Annette, and I have the website AnnetteDom.com because that's my name, and I am turning 33 on June 10th, so I thought it would be fun to make a video of me answering 33 questions about my blog. Some of these answers will be a little longer, and then some of them will be more rapid fire, which is ironic because I pride myself when I write an article to not leave it in a question answer format. But for this, yes. 1. Who encouraged you to start your blog? Chris LaBelle. So prior to this, I was volunteering as a writer for another website, and by the end of it, I didn't really want to do it anymore. And I asked Chris, will you be my last interview on this other website? And he said, no, but I'll be your first interview if you do it under your own name. Which leads to my second interview. Who used the word penis in their interview? Camille Porthouse. So Camille was my roommate, and she also is a fantastic photographer, and she has a bit of a darker subject matter. And I had interviewed her for the other website that I had mentioned, but we knew they probably wouldn't let me use the word penis, so I reposted it on my website. Who was the first person that you interviewed that you did not know in real life? That would be Andrea Powers. When I very first started my blog, I decided I'm only going to contact people I know because I figured there'd be a better chance of getting a response. But then I read about Andrea in the newspaper. She makes stickers. I'm not sure if she's still doing that. It's been a long time, but I did eventually meet her at a craft show. Who did you interview at Victoria Park? Victoria Park is a park in London, Ontario, and it can be very scary, especially at nighttime. But I went there and I interviewed, let's see, Jojo Mason, Daniel Turris, and Chad Price. Who did you interview at the Western Fair? Wes Mack. So I was just talking about this the other day. There was a wine and food show at the Western Fair in January, which is not normally when you would go to the fair. And I had asked Wes ahead of time, hey, I know you're coming to this event. Can I please interview you? And then when we got there, I asked him again, can we please do this interview? And he said yes. And then we had to wander around and find a room that we could do the interview in. And we ended up going to an empty boardroom that we probably weren't supposed to be in. Who did you interview at Covent Garden Market? Sean Austin. So they used to do, like I called them market days on Thursdays, where they would bring country singers in to perform. And when Sean was done, I cornered him and I was like, will you please do an interview with me? And we sat at a table and we did it. Who did you interview at A&W? Doc Walker. They said it was the best A&W interview ever. Which interviews were not a full interview? So this one I always feel bad about because I always say, I did this many interviews, but Kip Moore was not a full interview, but I counted it at the time. So that led to One Question With, which was a series of videos that I did. And now when I post a reel on Instagram, I try to, if possible, pick out one question that they answered really well and put that there. Also, I had contacted Tyler Kite, who happens to be the background on my phone. Don't tell Tyler. And we were Facebook friends. And I said, hey, would you like to do an interview with me? And he answered on Facebook, but he had a limited amount of time. So he just picked his favorite questions instead of answering all 10. Who was the first person to respond via Instagram? That would be Kurt Tossi. I think that's how you say his last name. That's really terrible that was so many years ago and I don't know how to say that. So he was basically the first really popular person on Instagram that I interviewed, and I tried to find his email address and I couldn't find it, so I just took a chance and messaged him on Instagram, and he wrote back and sent his answers that way. Who was your first phone interview? Tommy Avalone. That was very nerve-wracking. I have a video of that, and I had to phone the United States, and I don't have a phone plan for that, and that was very expensive. That was the only interview that actually cost me money to do. Who are you most nervous to interview? So to be fair, I'm nervous to interview everybody, but I remember for Brett Kissel, he was interview number 5, and also one of my very favorite people, but for some reason, I just didn't even have the courage to send the email, and I remember just sitting there and sweating for an hour. And my friend, he knew Brett's PR person at the time, And I'm like, could you just email them? And they're like, no. So finally I just did the email, and then that worked out. And then after that, I just ranked it by how badly I had to pee before every interview. And that would be Mike Manning the first time. Fred Penner, I was nervous because he's an icon. And Crystal Shawanda, I just really had to go to the bathroom. Who was the first person to invite you to interview them? That would also be Mike Manning. I thought about that after. There were a couple people that I think just felt sorry for me, and they're like, hey, I'll do an interview with you when I was doing the Road to 100 interviews. But Mike was, I would say, the first big name. I had interviewed Mike in 2021, and then this year he started a podcast called The Actor's Agenda. So before people even really knew about it, he said, I would love to talk to you about this. What is the most common name on your interview list? That would be Matt. So I have interviewed Matt O'Brien, Matt Cutshall, Matt Bushell, and Matt Eicheldinger. Aside from Canada, which other countries have your guests been from? I said the word guest, but I didn't really know. They're not really guests because it's not a podcast, but we'll go with that. So aside from Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Brazil. 15. Who did their very first interview with you? That would be Cross Parallel, which was Jordan Burchett and his fiancee Danielle Marie King. They joined together to create a band, and they had obviously done interviews before that, but it was their first interview together, and also my first and only interview that I did on Skype. Thank God for Zoom. Have you interviewed people who are related to each other? Yes. So I just mentioned Jordan Burchett. I also interviewed his dad, Aaron, and then I also interviewed Music Travel Love, who you might know as Bob and Clint Moffat from the Moffats. Who have you interviewed based on other people's recommendations? Kent Nixon, Sam Gillett, Jared Middleton, and Barbara Dorn, who was one of my more recent interviews. I feel like there were more people that I didn't know that were recommended to me, but these were the ones that were top of mind. Which interview initially didn't work out that you did later? Robin Ottolini. This is another one where there would be more people, but Robin Ottolini, I think I tried a number of times, and then I finally got it to work out last year. On that note, I usually ask people 3 times, and if they don't respond, I'm like, okay, no more. Who had the most unique job? Chris Stiller. Chris Stiller is a medium. Which interview did you get up the earliest for? That was Tigga Mack and Katie Scoble. They live in Australia, and I remember we did the interview, it was 6 a.m. for me, so I think I got up at about 4:30. Which interview did you go through a snowstorm for? Logan Stotts. He was performing at Fanshawe College, and I had already asked if I could come and do the interview there, and they said yes, and then it was wicked outside, and I really didn't want to go, but I had already said I would come and do the interview. Which interview did you almost miss? Tyler Shaw. This is probably the most memorable and also probably the biggest learning lesson for me, which is do not fool around on your computer or your phone when you're minutes away from doing an interview. So that day in particular, I was doing like an Inktober challenge, but it was in August, and the prompt was little, so I did a picture that had Chicken Little in it and Zach Braff, and then I got distracted because Zach Braff actually liked the photo, and I was freaking out, and I was supposed to get a call from Sony Music Canada in regards to my interview with Tyler Shaw, and they phoned me early, and I guess I had the phone on silent, and I missed it, and then there was a whole ordeal because I had to phone Sony Music Canada back, and the person, whoever answered the phone, didn't believe me that I had an interview with Tyler Shaw, and I sound so young on the phone that they probably thought I was just some fangirl trying to talk to Tyler at the record company. That was awful. Who had the longest interview? John Maxim, and he wrote me 10 pages of answers, and it was a lot. Other interviews usually average around 6 to 7 pages, if not less. Who was the youngest person that you interviewed? Abby Stewart. Abby was still in high school at the time of her interview. Who was the oldest person that you interviewed? Rebecca, I'm going to butcher her name, Danagelis. Her son did a documentary about her losing her job. Who did their interview in the car? So this is where Zoom comes in. So Patty Sullivan did her interview in the car, and I got to see in the car. And then Mike Plume did his interview in the car, but we did it over the phone. Who did their interview at work? Carlos Bustamante. This one makes me sad because he did his interview at ET Canada basically in his dressing room, and ET Canada no longer exists. Who was the fastest to say yes? Speaking of ET Canada, Morgan Hoffman was the fastest to say yes. She replied in about 5 minutes, and so did Dan Garza, who was my latest interview as of the time that I'm filming this, and that was like that. That was like, okay, let's do a Zoom interview. Like, no questions asked, and that was really impressive. Who did their interview at the LA County Fair? Also Dan Garza. This was a surprise to me because he said he was going to be doing the interview in the car too. And then he was just wandering around the fair, and it was hilarious. I saw a tractor, and I never would have thought I would have seen that in a video from LA. Who gave the best advice? Dan Davidson. He had said, be great and don't go away, which is essentially like, be good at what you're doing and don't give up. Which interview was viewed the most? Carl Bradbury. He had like over 1 million followers on Facebook, so a lot of people saw it. Which interview stayed with you the most? All of them, but in particular, Tim Chasen, because at that time, I was really struggling to get interviews and I didn't know if it would be worth doing. And he wrote me a really nice message. I always think about that when I am struggling. And this is a self-serving question, and it's the last one. But who was the first person to donate to your PayPal link? That was Lawrence Chow. I was really humbled by that. I don't make any money from these interviews. I don't pay the person to do an interview with me. They just do it out of kindness. And Lawrence sent me enough money to buy, I think, either supper or lunch, and then I had a little bit left over. So that was very kind. And I'll put a link in if you like this video. You can also make a donation.